Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm honored to be participating in the CSJ Center Symposium, Faces of Justice, Transforming Thought and Transforming Action. My name is Mary Trunk, and I had the pleasure of directing the film you are about to see. I met Ray Leonardini, our producer, while working on a different project, and we hit it off. For over a decade, Ray has been visiting incarcerated men in Folsom State Prison, where he has been teaching and facilitating a meditation practice called centering prayer. The men in the film have been practicing with Ray for a long time. They have a faith and trust in him that was extended to me. And I feel so fortunate to know them, and I'm grateful they trusted me with their stories. The 22-minute film, Holding Still, focuses on a diverse group of men that speak candidly about their years-long journey practicing centering prayer. They share their stories and wisdom with the intention of bringing this practice to other incarcerated men and women, knowing the power of the practice to heal trauma and transform toxic shame. Lawrence, Paul, Artist, B, Greg, Eddie Lee, and many others reveal the challenges and rewards of transforming their thoughts and actions. After the screening, we're super fortunate to have two of the men, Lawrence Hamilton and Artist Knox, here to answer questions and discuss further what centering prayer means for them. Please put your questions in the Q&A feature in the chat. We also have the editor of the film, Karen McCaleb, and maybe our cinematographer, Roman Zenz, as well as our organizer of all things, Lizzie Udwin, here as well, if you have questions for them. And for more information about centering prayer, including a discussion and screening guide, and access to Ray's books about his experiences, please visit the website, which we'll put in the chat as well. It's uspcf.org. The film is also on YouTube, so please feel free to share it far and wide, and the link will also be in the chat. So thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Stephanie, so much for all your help. And I think we're ready to start.
For the majority of my life, I ran away from my feelings. I learned as a little kid, early on, since the age of 10 years old, every time I felt hurt, every time I felt any type of way, I would hit myself in the face. And I would say things like, "You better stop, you stupid bitch." And I would stop. I wouldn't feel anything.
Whoever the meanest dude was that was getting out of prison at the time, that was gonna come into my mother's life and control the flow of narcotics, that's who the boss was at Mom's house. Dangerous things going on, that the next day when you go to school and all the rest of the kids are talking about like Bart Simpson, and like the door got kicked in and you got tied up with phone cords last night and people were there to steal dope and money, but you can't say that to the kids that are talking about Bart Simpson, right?
I was physically abused and sexually abused as a kid, and I never told anybody.
Going through that as a kid, when you just have people let you down, especially when you try to express to them a situation and they don't get it or they take it serious or whatever. But the way to express that was not to express it, but just go through living life violently. That's what it was.
You know, certain type of people see that in you. It's an opportunity for them. It's a weakness.
You know, everybody on my mom's side of the family would talk garbage about him in front of me. You know, call him a loser, a deadbeat, he's no good. And they would use a lot of cuss words when they said it. And then every time I got in trouble, they'd tell me I was just like my dad. So all those things coupled together, yeah, I feel shame. Not only for the things that happened to me, but for things that I've done as well.
The fact that I haven't seen my son, who I had custody of since he was born, and at 6 years old, I had to leave him and go to prison because of my bad decisions. And here I am giving him trauma. I passed on the trauma.
Shame actually was rage. How could you make me do something like that? All those feelings, all they did was harm me.
Oh, man.
How you doing, Roy?
Good, bro.
Oh, man. When I saw Lawrence and Paul, woo, we met in the circle. We met in the silence. I was at Folsom State Prison, and they had just let us off of Fish Row, and I just ran out to the yard. It was like overwhelming because you saw all these inmates, people working out, people arguing, people playing dominoes. Then I saw this trail of like 5 white people walking in a single file line, like moseying through. And they go to the Greystone Chapel, the church. I'm like, what's going on? And I was curious, so I walk into the chapel, and the inmates, the men are setting up chairs in a circle. And then I look at the yard, it's chaos. I look inside of the chapel, it's peace and like this ritual and serenity. I look outside at the yard, and I look in the chapel, and I said, okay, this is where I want to be.
Let's do it. Let's close our eyes when we're ready. Take a deep breath. Feel our feet flat on the floor. Let the air go out slowly.
Okay, this is the way the practice is supposed to work. Sit in a comfortable position, just letting thoughts go in your mind, and you're not paying attention. Well, I mean, the thoughts are trying to get your attention, but your thing is to just listen to God. So God is the silence in between the thoughts.
My first experience doing centering prayer was not the greatest. I thought I had to like turn my mind off where I had no thoughts at all. And I just found it frustrating that I couldn't do that. And so I thought I was doing it wrong.
the thoughts are always taking you away. So while you're sitting there, the thought is, you're sitting there and you're like this, and the thought is taking you to thought. You know, it might be a terrible thought, like something that happened to you when you were a child, or something that happened to somebody that you love. But as you just sit there, you know, pretty soon you're able to not react physically or mentally or emotionally. So the story is just going. So as the story takes you away, grabs you, whatever, anger, whatever, resentment, whatever. But in between that thought and the next thought, there's silence. And in that silence, you can kind of hear God's voice. I mean, it's magical for me because it's God healing you, but in his own language. And God's language for me is silence, but it's a silence that really says something to you.
After the silence, after we sit for a number of minutes, Ray introduces a subject, and then it will activate something within someone in the group, and then we'll start dialoguing.
We'll have a topic, shame or guilt or love or forgiveness.
That day, he was speaking about shame, and it really struck me because I've done a lot of self-reflection. I've done a lot of groups in prison, self-help groups in prison, and this is a topic that we don't speak about more. We go around shame. We talk a lot about the actions, but we don't talk about why. And I really sat there and I listened to him about shame and the emotions of shame and how it affects our life. And it was the first time I heard it, and I wanted more. I wanted more, and I just kept coming.
What's the most difficult topic? I think the most difficult topic for all of us is toxic shame. Not only did you do something bad, but you are bad. You know, you're just a bad person.
It's dark. It's very, very, very painful. I've sat calling myself meditating and tears just running down my face because of not only what I felt towards myself, but the harm I've done to others. Yeah. Because I didn't know how to deal with what was going on within me.
I started seeing the childhood traumas that I didn't even realize were there in the first place. And so that was kind of like scary, like Josh was saying, it's scary because it's like, man, what do I do with this?
Mom and Dad are arguing. There they are in the living room arguing. And so I was scared to death. I still remember that fear. And I remember that fear every time something comes up. I hate violence. I can't stand violence. And I became violent. It continued to fester and fester and fester because I didn't know how to address it. I didn't know how to be who I was supposed to be.
And I start trying to build a callus over that, over those emotions, start trying to use anger, hatred as a way to control my own emotional content. And what I realized after years and years of wrestling with those tears, those uncontrollable tears, is just grief. I never allowed myself to experience the grief of domestic violence or the grief of, familial suicide, or, you do things to people that haunt you. Decades later, you start to feel like, I've forfeited my own soul, some of the stuff I've done to people. So I know what it's like to run away from that grief, run away from those emotions. I just don't want to live like that anymore.
Experience within the meditation, and honestly most of the time it's like I'm getting attached to every thought, and it's dragging me down this rabbit hole. I never felt like I'm any good at this. I'm sitting through it so that I can participate in the conversation. I don't know when things kind of shifted. I did have one experience of like just feeling like a tenderness. Every day you're doing push-ups and this so that you can be like tough, so nothing can get to you. You know, the state of California tried force for 20 years and it didn't work. But like that tenderness, that feeling like saying you're okay, man. You're all right. You're not. You're not that bad a guy, man. Even if you've done some bad stuff. And look, everybody in that circle, like, shit, everybody in the world needs to feel a little bit of that, man.
It was entering into the silence and analyzing these feelings of rejection, of fear, of hurt, of feeling lonely, of feeling afraid, of feeling violated, of feeling not good enough, not tough enough, not masculine enough. But it was about after 6 months of sitting and centering prayer and hearing these guys talk about their pain and their shame and why they actually are afraid and angry and why they committed their crimes.
I had just about the worst role models that you could have. Like when I look in my toolbox, man, I got one tool, and that's to not feel vulnerable because I'm being aggressive. And so now you're on defense and you're vulnerable, and now I don't feel like I don't feel weak. If that's the only tool you got, you learn to use it pretty good, but it's not adequate.
In the past, I was never able to look within myself. Never, because I was always afraid of the way I felt about it when I would do it. And I recognize now why I was so bitter and so angry at the whole world and everybody else, because I would hold all these things in, and any little thing would trigger me to act either violently, turn me to drugs, or any kind of criminal behavior.
Because we all came to prison because we acted out of the fear, of the shame. So we're all suffering from the same condition. We're trying to escape ourselves.
My thoughts would tell me all kind of crazy things about life, about what someone did, about the past, about me wanting revenge, about what I need to do to make things right. And that's what's so liberating about centering prayer and learning how to sit still with yourself, is that you have a space now where you could look at your thoughts and say, what the fuck am I thinking? What the fuck is that? Nah, that's not right. And it leads you to better decisions.
As you can be over here with all the nonsense, or you can be over here as a man with other men who decide to change their lives and move forward in life.
I tried numerous of things, try to deal with this pain. But when I came to this class right here and spoke about it, it healed me.
I love myself for who I am today, and making peace with myself, I think that it helps me make peace with other people.
Now I feel that sense of calmness. There's this sense of weight lifted off my shoulders.
I'm probably, with the exception of being in prison, the happiest I've ever been.
Each and every one of these guys in here is going through a struggle that I thought that I was the only one that was going through it. It just like opened my eyes, as in, you're not alone.
There is such a monumental relief, and there is such a freedom in it. And it's not a magic wand, it's not a silver bullet, it's not a shot of whiskey. It's not something that you realize or understand or grab onto right away. It's a process, but the results are very, very real, and they're not an accident. You know, there used to be this old ad on TV, and the catch line was, "The mind is a terrible thing to waste." Well, in my case, you could drop the last two words. You know, mind is just a terrible thing. It's like one horrible memory after another horrible memory. And then by doing this process, I finally realized, you know what? Those thoughts aren't me. That's the junk that I've picked up over the decades. And I can let that stuff go. And I can start putting that stuff in its rightful place. And I can start tapping into much more important things like faith, hope, love, joy, courage, wisdom. You know, they're all in there, and it's funny, they all have their own language, and their first language is silence. And that's just the craziest thing. That would have never occurred to me prior to tapping into this thing.
You really don't have to be mad. You don't have to be sad. You know, I mean, that's the normal reaction, but you get a chance to choose your own reaction. But as you're sitting there in silence, and the silence is healing all of that, the stuff that would just make you, that would turn you and twist you, it doesn't turn you and twist you anymore. And then you can, I guess, make a conscious choice of how you want to respond. Just by having access to this practice, we get to tune into something that's not judgmental. You know, a lot of people that have been through what we've been through, and they haven't had the benefit of this center and prayer. They're still walking around feeling guilty. And here we are coming out of prison probably with some of us have some pretty serious offenses. But we're not looking down on ourselves, and we're not looking down on other people in our position. We're not looking down on anybody that's going through anything, because we're realizing that circumstances had molded that behavior, but it molded that behavior while we were asleep. But now we're back awake, where we're not driven by, like we were saying, that false self, something, the ego that wants to prove something, that wants to, we just want to experience the joy of living. And just by having that intention, our life turns beautiful. What do you call that thing, a paradigm shift? Where you think the whole world is against you, and now the whole world seems interactive everywhere I go. But all I see is like goodness and people enjoying life. And before, my life was based on how much what I had, material shit, you know, cars, clothes, females, all this. And that stuff is not important. What's important is the relationships. Man, you don't know. Then again, you do know how good it feels to sit here with you guys, man, and know what we've been through, man, and know that, you know, you brought this light to us, and now we're basking in this light. It's almost like a person with the miracle cure, and he's trying to promote it. Look, all you have to do is this, and everybody's looking at you. No, it can't be that simple, you know. But it is.
You know, Lawrence, that dude has a way of summing things up in such a profound way. Yeah, that's it. It does make you feel like you're gonna be okay.
That's how I felt about Polly, because it's like a lifelong friend. We built such a bond, you know, like in centering prayer. We built such a bond in the yard and in the youth diversion that it's indescribable, because you go through things in prison that people out here don't understand. You go through the depression, you go through the anxieties, the bitterness, and it's only what they can understand. And so when you see someone out here that has walked in your shoes, you say, wow, you know, he's made it too. He's gonna be okay, I'm gonna be okay. And we're all doing okay.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for watching. I'd like to introduce artist Knox and Lawrence Hamilton, if they're available to answer some questions, and just introduce yourselves. I'm assuming you're in the, oh, Lawrence raised his hand already. And let's see, I'm sure you'll appear as, here we go. There's Artist. Hi, Artist. Nice to see you. Lawrence, I think you need to turn your camera on, and maybe that will, you'll get on the panel here. But Artist, why don't we start with you? I thought we'd start with the two of you, maybe introducing yourselves, telling us a little about what's going on and what centering prayer means to you today.
Hello. First of all, hello, Mary. Hello, Ray. What's up, Lawrence?
Hi, Lawrence.
Hey.
Every time I see the film and I just see the chapel, I'm there. I remember the smell, the sight, the feeling of hope and despair. You know, just I remember it. And I remember a time when I was standing by, they have a white rose bush right in front of the chapel. And Lawrence was standing in front of the rose bush. And it was just him waiting before Ray and the crew came in. And so I went over and talked with Lawrence. And it was almost as if time had stopped. It was the right rose bush, a few bees flying around. It was the noise in the background on the yard. And here Lawrence and I were talking. Lawrence picked a raw flower. I picked the flower. And we're standing there smelling the flower, talking about life, the practice, and the future. And just time stood still. And ever since then, I just felt so connected with Lawrence, man. I love you, brother. And the practice itself, being connected with the group, being connected with Ray on a level that is so deep, it's inseparable from my DNA, because I feel so close to Ray, to Lawrence, to Paulie, to Ket, because we experienced something in the group, in the silence, that's indescribable. And just thinking about it grounds me when I'm frustrated, when I'm angry in my life, when I feel like I'm not doing enough, I'm not enough, and all these things coming from all these directions. And I remember the feel of hopeful desperation, and it centers me. And then it reminds me, I got to get back to the practice.
Yeah. How about you, Lawrence? How are you?
I'm great. It's good to be here, and it's good to see everybody. And you know, whatever I'm doing, I'm always going to do whatever I can to try to promote this practice, you know, not only in prison, but outside of prison. It's a trip. I remember what artists were saying about when we were standing by the chapel, you know, and, you know, the difference is, you know, before the practice, I probably wouldn't have been nowhere near the chapel. And also, I wouldn't even been paying no attention to any roses or anything, but just from, you know, the transformative effect of the practice, you know, instead of looking out in the world at what's, you know, you start looking out for what's beautiful. And as I looked over there and saw those roses, we're just talking. And next thing you know, we're picking roses. We're in prison, you know, we tough prison guys. And we walking back with our roses, you know, we don't care what nobody think, you know, we're not into that ego and all that stuff no more. We're just into enjoying life, you know, and trying to make the best. So, I mean, I can't say enough about this practice and what the possibilities of what it can do for people.
Lawrence, we heard artists in the film talk about how he saw the people, the white people going through the yard, and I wondered, how did you start? How did you learn about centering prayer?
The guy that I used to walk the yard with, matter of fact, he's still in there. But as we walked more and more and talked, there was just something that was a little bit different. You know, it wasn't like, you know, the normal depressive. I mean, he seemed to have just some type of joy about, you know, and he wasn't letting, like, you know, because we had like thoughts going through our minds all the time that just taking us away. And he was a person that was free from that. And when I finally figured out what he was doing, going to that chapel, I followed him over there. And man, it was amazing. You know, the first thing I always keep going back to this because Ray, Ray is my friend, my mentor, my counselor, even to this day, but I had never seen him before. And I walk in the chapel, and here's a guy talking about you can have an intimate relationship with God. I'm like, what? And, just by being interested, I sat down, started doing the practice, and I found out that, he was telling the absolute truth. You can have an intimate relationship with God. So that's what that was about for me.
Lawrence, you talk about the silence, God's language being silent. I think you both do. What does the silence say to you?
Because it's silent, it's really, you can't translate it.
Your mic,
Like,
oh, there you go. Go ahead, go for it. You're good.
Yeah, because it's silence, you really can't, I can't translate it. But what it seems like it does, I remember something in the Bible where, where when God forgives you, he doesn't even remember your sins anymore. He takes you from that point forward. And I think that's what happens when you're sitting in that silence. There are, things from the past, fears of the future. But when the practice finally takes hold, you're sitting in that silence. And in that silence, there's nothing but peace because you have nothing, nothing to fear and nothing holding you back. And the more time you spend in that, the less effect that past or fear of the future has on you. And you build that strong presence in the now. And life is always beautiful now. Even if you were going to the firing squad and they were like, man, we're gonna kill you in 10 minutes. But you would be like, but how about now? Are you breathing now? Do you feel, right now, at least until you get there, everything's gonna be perfect. And that kind of helps you to stay in the now.
Artist, how about you?
It took me some time to comprehend what was happening to me. And for a long time, I struggled because I was raised in church and they're saying, oh, you have to pray this way, you pray this way. Or, it's like this petition we have to God and this long list of things we, look up and we yell for over and over as if God didn't remember what we said the last time. And I was thinking about like language, like God is speaking to me, and then he's speaking to somebody in Afghanistan, and he's speaking to somebody in Tulum, and he's speaking to somebody in Portugal. What language is he really saying? Before there was language, what were we hearing? And then it got to the point where I said, the silence, I didn't hear it. I felt it. I experienced it in my body, in my spirit, more so than a language. So it became a feeling, an experience that goes beyond the senses for me. So if I couldn't hear, if I couldn't see, if I couldn't touch, if I was mute, if I didn't have arms, how would I experience God in the purest form of the essence that's not diluted? It's just pure concentration of love that I believe that pierces to the hearts of everyone to where we're defenseless against it because there is no way to label it, to judge it, to assign it, to alter it, to change it, to color it, to flavor it. It's just the unadulterated pureness of God that I believe brought the universe into existence. And in the presence of that, we're defenseless.
I love that. Artist, you talked a bit in when I was listening to the film again, I saw you talked about passing on the trauma. How does that feel now? And what did, if you want to elaborate a little bit?
I passed on the trauma because I remember my dad was alcoholic for about 45 years. And I remember he'd get into these alcoholic stupors and he would just spew out all this vitriol, this pain and frustration and anger and regret of his life and where he went wrong. And I remember him saying what his dad did to him and his dad's choices. My granddad was an alcoholic and experimented with drugs, and my dad became a drug addict, crack houses. My dad used to take us to crack houses, and I was connecting with Paulie's story about how his parents got, tied up and they were drug dealers. My dad was a drug user. So we used to go to crack houses as a kid and, like kids, we talk about what they did the day before, the night before, and I'm sitting here like traumatized about seeing my dad smoke crack. And so handing the trauma down is when my father injured me with his trauma. And then here I am making unsound decisions based on the trauma that was handed down to me. And now my son is living it. And even now I see the effects of it because it's something that he has to work through now.
Yeah.
And I live with that. And when I get upset with him, when I get frustrated with him, I feel like I overact or I yell and I lose sight of the practice and twos. And I feel like, oh man, all those years of sitting practice just is messed up. I failed. And then I remember it's all a process. I handed it down and now I have to do the work and I have to see the reflection of myself and my son. So now I don't feel so bad about it. What it is it's like a place marker for me to remember what I need to return to keep the cycle from continuing.
Yeah. I know I have a similar situation in my family, so it's a conscious effort or process, yes. Lawrence, you talked about shame and rage kind of being the same thing. You want to talk about that a little bit?
For me, the shame turned to rage. I mean, there were many different aspects of shame. You know, shame of what you did and shame of what was done to you. And I think the shame of what was done to me, you know, when I reflected on it, it just put a rage in me. And that rage was, I don't care where I am. I don't care if it's an army. I don't care if it's 50 million to one. I'm rather die than feel that way again. I'm not gonna feel that way again. I don't care what happens. Not only would I rather die than feel that way again, I'd rather kill than feel that way again. So, you know, whatever, I mean, that shame, I mean, it's so impactful. And then there's the other shame of, I guess, shame of what you've done. That's the shame that you can't never speak of, that you have to hold in, that you never get to feel like your authentic self because you always got that little shameful secret of whatever it was that you can't. And so, I mean, it just shame is one of those kind of things that pulls you both ways. And, you know, your emotions are going to circle around that shame, you know, from rage, frustration, fear. I mean, it's so much that's tied up into shame, you know, and shame is something that's just used, you know. I mean, growing up, I mean, a lot of times, even when kids get potty trained, they get potty trained. They're not doing it like they used to do in the old days, but that's how they get potty trained. You know, you still, you know, and shame, you know. So, I mean, shame is a big part of how we learn.
Yeah, shame and fear of, you know, you're going to fail or you're going to be bad or a bad person. What do you think about when Josh was talking about grief and how he felt like he thought about everything you just mentioned, but then he realized it was a form of grief. Does that make sense to you? Does it resonate with either one of you?
I know for me, it took me a long time to say that it was actual shame because, you know, grief is the kind of thing that what's so bad about grief is you just can't do nothing about it. You know, no matter how you wish it would have been different, no matter what you wish you would have did instead, you know, it's just no fixing it. So that's why the grief to me was the biggest part.
Yeah.
You know, for me, I didn't realize because some things we're still coming into, and I believe some mysteries that God gives us, we don't solve until we're 50, 60, because there's some things at 40 I'm just now figuring out. I've been, you know, thinking over. And I was speaking through Ray through email, and I was expressing to him how after I preach, most of the times, if not all, as many times I remember, I get this bad headache, and sometimes I get these nosebleeds. And I have to preach, I have to get home, and I have to stay in bed all day, turn the lights out. And I have this extreme headache, and I just go over all these things. And then Ray had emailed me. He said, you know, it could be attributed to, you know, some self-loathing. And so then I look up self-loathing and I do some research. It's about, you know, feeling like you're not good enough and like you're not capable, you know, regret, grief, and all these things that happen. And I was like, wow, that was my missing piece. Because even when I'm preaching up there, I feel like I'm not good enough. I'm an ex-felon. I was arrested for arson. You know, I didn't have enough money. Don't have the perfect credit. I don't own a home. I'm not prepared for retirement. And here I am preaching to these people about, you know, God, and and I don't even have my life all the way in order. And I said, wow, the self-loathing is connected to the grief, which is connected to the regret, which is connected to the shame.
Mm-hmm.
And the shame is connected to the experience. And that experience is connected to those who experienced the same cycle through their generations. So my father's father, my father, and then it came to me through the experience, the shame, the grief, the self-loathing, and here I am still handing it off and not realizing. So when they say the practice brings us back to the silence and then we experience this healing, it's little by little you get this deposit, but you got to stick with it, because I believe if we just sat once and we became enlightened, we wouldn't learn anything. It's the process, and the process is what the healing is. The process is the ritual, the whatever you want to call the religion, but it's the centering practice that brings us to this awareness of ourselves. But we got to keep going to the fountain to drink.
Mm-hmm. You talked about silence, and you also dialogue afterwards. You share stories. Is it important to do both, and why?
You want to take that first, Lawrence?
Yeah, I think it's important, because sometimes you don't know how deep you're getting an insight, you're getting a transformation, and it's bright, but because of maybe the way that you're thinking about it, there's still like a little veil over it. You can see the light, but then when you dialogue with someone else and you get their insights, it just seems like it shines and it makes it brighter. You gain more and more insight by just getting a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so much of the mysteries of life are contained in stories, allegories, and experiences.
Mm.
And I believe that's one of the beautiful things about the Bible is you can read an allegory or a story and you can pull up so much information. But what you pull out depends on where you are mentally, emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
and your level of maturity. And each time you come to a verse or an allegory, something new comes out of it. So the story is very important because the story gives you a reference for the experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I also think that personal stories can often resonate more than just the general idea of what people are experiencing. Paul talks about feeling tenderness during, I love that he talks about how centering prayer was difficult. And I know, trying to do that kind of work can be challenging, but he talked about feeling tenderness. And I wondered if you felt that as well, or that makes sense to you, or you want to describe that for yourself.
I absolutely felt a sense of tenderness, a sense of closeness. Sometimes it was temporary because of the environment that we were in. So it was as if I was reminded of my humanity and my divinity, but then I had to go back into this false reality in order to survive. So that tenderness, I experienced it whenever we gathered as a group or whenever we went into the science. But the part of it is that the group, that tenderness was more concentrated because there were so many other individuals who were just as desperate and just as open and hopeful as I was. And we were pulling on the same source. And it created this synergy that we couldn't get in. I still can't experience that. I still haven't, shouldn't say can't, but I still haven't experienced that tenderness in the free world as I did at the Greystone Chapel in Folsom State Prison.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll find out when I'm 60.
Lawrence?
Good luck. I'm 70. I still haven't found out.
It's a process. You have to keep at it. Yeah.
For sure. I think tenderness is, I mean, I guess it took me a while to even admit that there was some tenderness. You know, when I thought of tenderness, I would always think of like a young kid or something, an innocent, you know. But I mean, and any type of tenderness could be considered a weakness. You know, you wouldn't express any type of tenderness. You know, even though you might have felt it, but you wouldn't admit to it. But I think over a period of time, the idea that there was tenderness and compassion and caring and kindness inside you, and through this practice you realize that that's really what's inside of everyone. You know, however clouded over it is by whatever circumstances life has created for us that we either participated in through choice or not, you know, that's what's inside of everyone. That's the most beautiful thing to me about this practice, is that it has just totally convinced me that, like when Ray said, an intimate relationship with God, that when you get to that core relationship, that's really what it all is. It's all love, it's all tenderness, it's all compassion, it's all caring. And you know, once you realize that that's inside of everyone, and you know that whatever presentation they're giving to you, whether they know it or not, then you're able to like like when artists was saying about trying to experience the tenderness with people out here. It's like sometimes it gets hard because I mean the respect level in prison is much higher because your life could depend on it. Out here, you know, people are coming up with all kind of different, and but once you realize that at that core, they've got that same thing that I'm saying, that tenderness, that love, then you can kind of give them a break and kind of experience tenderness. If you don't show it, you can experience it yourself for them in your own heart.
Hmm. You were going to say something, Artist? Go for it.
Yes, thank you. You know, I'm reminded of the verse where it says, God says that he'll take out our heart of stone and give us a heart of flesh.
Hmm.
And I didn't understand that for a while, but the heart of flesh is the tenderness,
Mm-hmm.
the ability to respond accordingly to those in our environment and to be able to empathize. And I had to realize that a lot of individuals, especially in the society that we're in, because we're so removed from one another, we're so disconnected because of technology,
Mm-hmm.
that we lack empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And we lack a sense of tenderness and vulnerability and honesty with one another, to where, and what the Bible says, you know, love thy neighbor as you love yourself. Your neighbor isn't only the person that lives next to you. Your neighbor is everyone that you encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tenderness, having a tenderness, a sense of empathy for those we encounter. You know, it's very important in order to make this whole experience called being human cohesive. And the tenderness was developed in a place where it was anything but that is the mystical power of the practice.
Yeah, I think I mean, it makes total sense what you both said. And also, I thought Paul brought up that it made him also feel like he mattered, like he's okay, even if he's done bad things, like he's still lovable, like he's still worthy of love. Would you agree with that?
I think that's like really like the main point, because before the practice, I actually felt that I was my thoughts. I didn't feel like I was having thoughts. I feel like I was my thoughts. I was my emotions. But through the practice, you're able to just let those thoughts go. Like I said, you're over a period of time, you're training yourself to not listen to the thoughts, but just wait for because a thought will run in stream, one thought, then another thought, then another thought. But in between that thought, there is a period of silence. And you wait for that silence, and then pretty soon you're getting ready to anticipate that silence. And then pretty soon you're basking in that silence. And before you know it, the first word of thoughts was, with a little silence in between. Now the thoughts are far in between because the silence is so more healing, and it's like it can be blissful, if you take it really far. So, and then once you realize that you're not those thoughts, and you're not those emotions, then it gives you a chance to actually look at, life a whole lot differently.
Mm. Did you want to add something to that, artist? Or?
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree too. Um, there was a man at the end of the film who talks about all the junk of his thoughts, and that and it speaks to what we were just saying, what you were both saying, that it's not who he is. It's just the junk he sort of kept in there, and he, to replace it with love and faith, and I especially liked how he talked about a mind is a terrible thing to waste, and he thought his mind was a terrible thing, which is, I wondered what you thought about that, and if you even know him.
I don't know the individual personally. I just remember, I believe I remember seeing him on the art, but I did see a lot of faces. Claudio, GP, Gerald,
Yeah.
so the core group. But there's other individuals that were new to the group, and there were faces that I had recognized, and there were some faces that were in the group that had never said anything after months of being in the group. I do know that because they were still trying to define the experience.
Mhm.
But the individual that was speaking, I remember seeing, but I've never spoken to myself.
Did you feel like what he was saying sort of made sense to you, or not?
Oh, absolutely. It absolutely made
Yeah.
sense, because I was blown away when I was reading in a psychology book that there's brain cells in our heart.
Hmm.
And then when you see that it says, the Bible says, I bring everything back to the Bible, you got to forgive me, that, God speaks to
You're
the
good at
hearts. Yeah, that God speaks to the hearts of men and women, that, when people say, oh, you follow your heart, well, the heart is communicating too. So heart's like, hey, I got a say in this too.
Yeah.
So then it starts to make sense that the heart, the brain, and the gut all want something to say to you.
Mhm.
And yes, it's a terrible thing to waste if we don't know how to appropriate it. And I think a lot of what we do through our diet, through our lifestyle, through our spiritual practices cause us to misappropriate our minds and diminish the gift.
Mm. I have one last question, and then I want to read a couple things that people wrote, and if anyone else has questions, please feel free. But how would you define transformation? This symposium is about transforming thought, transforming action, and I wondered, I'm going to ask the experts, how do you define transformation for yourself?
Well, I definitely don't consider myself an expert, but
Well, you're more than me, that's for sure.
but I think there's transformation, and then there's kind of like a conscious direction of transformation. Because, if I think back when we started out as children, we all had that tenderness, that whatever, that inquisitiveness, that joy for living. And then like what happened, I guess, in Paulie's life, and like the artist mentioned a few things, and in my life, that caused a transformation, because you had to transform, without choice, to be something that could survive and something that could fit in with all the other traumatized people that were living around you. If you grew up in an area where there's poverty, unemployment, drugs, and alcohol, and and that's what your life is like, then you're subject to all these different things. But then sometimes what happens, I think a lot of times I've heard people say when they come to visit and they look at, sometimes they were saying the crimes that these guys did. And then when they hear about the life that the person have, they'll be like, damn, if I had went through a life like that, I'd be in there with that person. But then, like I say, with the healing of the practice, it's like your life isn't based anymore on circumstance of the past or anything. It just becomes based on, once you make this connection, and I go over and over again. I mean, I might be like overemphasizing that thing that that drives me the most. I mean, in my life, it's still a struggle sometimes, but that connection, I would never do anything. Once you make that connection, you would never do, I think it would be anybody that finally really makes it. Sometimes it takes a little longer, but once you make that connection, you'll never do anything to separate yourself from that. I think like what like when artists quotes the Bible and where he says neither height nor depth nor angels nor principality, nothing can separate you from my love. And once you get connected to that, so when you go out and your actions or other actions would be, whatever works for me, whatever I can, but now it's like, hey, is this going to bring me closer, or is this going to bring me separation from my spirit, from my true spirit? So then living out of that, it makes you a little bit more receptive to all the goodness and things of life. That's the part that I'm so, man, this feeling, this connection, that's the greatest thing that you can get. I think anybody could get.
I love that.
For me, I'm not quite clear on what transformation is, because sometimes I get stuck contemplating the great design of God, of the universe, and seeing the polarities that exist and the dichotomies that exist within creation, and seeing how there is a source, and the source made variations of itself, and those variations express its nature in different ways. And when we tap into those variations, we can either have good or bad results. And we transform on a daily, consistent basis. And sometimes, depending on our minds or where we are, we choose either a negative or a positive expression, and we transform. But the beauty about the transformation is it's continual. We don't have to stop. We can keep moving to another plateau. So I still don't understand the process just yet.
But that's very helpful for what both of you have said. It's not something that we reach, it's something we continue to work on. And I love both of that. I want to just read a couple of the things that people have wrote because it's so lovely. Stephanie Mejia says, so much of what you were sharing resonates with me. Thank you for sharing your healing journey with us. Sister Joanna Carroll, thank you for being so honest and vulnerable with us, sharing your stories and experience and wisdom. Your new light and transformation is beautiful and healing. Thanks for passing the love on. Shannon Green says, what a beautiful reflection on transformation, Lawrence. Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to hear about the journeys of you both. Thank you for sharing it with us. And Ray says, what would you say to someone in the yard who is not a believer yet is somehow attracted to centering prayer and is not sure it's the right move?
Geronimo. Just jump. Do it. And you'll figure it out when you get to the bottom, if there is a bottom.
How about you, Lawrence?
You know what? I totally agree because, I grew up where, see, my thing with the Bible was always that first they wrote the book, right? Then they told you what it meant, right? And then they told you how you were supposed to feel about it, and if you had any one of those out of kilter, something was wrong with you. But my mother and father always encouraged me to read it myself and see what I felt for myself. And so despite whatever religious, because we had Buddhists in there, Muslims in there, we had all, so despite it's not, a lot of it, they called it Catholic centering prayer. And we use like a lot of Bible things because that's what it was. But it's just the fact that it's not anything to do with what's being said or any of that. It's the process of the practice itself of centering prayer. And that's what it is, no matter what you got going on, if you do it long enough, like Ray says, the only wrong way to do it is not to do it. If you do it long enough, it's like some people, I was lucky because when he said connection with God, and immediately I came in and hooked on that, And I went through I almost hit bliss so quick that I was like, wow, this is the greatest thing since the wheel, since sliced bread, but then I did go through those dark nights of, wow, I'm not getting this. I'm not feeling this. And I realized that was God increasing my faith, knowing that when you're not feeling me, it's not because of me, it's because of you. And then every time I would adjust myself back and gain that connection. So I don't care what belief you have, I think it would be good for children to learn this. I mean, you come out into this world connected with that spirit, I can't do nothing but help make the world a better place.
Well said. I love that. Anything else, artist, you want to say, or?
I just want to say, when I arrived at Folsom, I was trying to find things to do to occupy my time. And so any group that would come up that I felt would be beneficial, I would just check it out. And so I went to the Buddhist group, and then I saw Lawrence. I went to the Catholic group, saw Lawrence. I went to the Christian group, and then I see Lawrence over in the corner, so I went to the Sitting Prayer group, saw Lawrence, and then I went to the Yoruba Ife spiritual practice group, Understanding African Spirituality, saw Lawrence. So I saw how he was able to tap in and extract, like to say, chew the fruit and spit out the seeds. You have to go into places that you wouldn't normally go, do things that you wouldn't normally do, and experience things that you wouldn't normally experience in order to get somewhere you need to be. And I tell people at the church like this, some way, somehow, God's going to send someone to do something that no one could do without divine intervention. But in order to get to that place, you got to take the jump. So back to what the question was, Ray was saying, you just got to Geronimo. You just do it.
I love that. Well, I am so grateful to both of you. It's really, really great to see you both. And I miss seeing you. We'll have to get together when we can actually be together in person. And I can't thank you enough for being here and for being so gracious with all your experiences and sharing everything with us. And I just want to thank Stephanie Mejia and Sister Judith Royer for inviting us to show the film here. Thank you all for watching. Please feel free to share the link far and wide. It would be great to get the word out. And again, we really appreciate it. And Lawrence and Artist, I'm so grateful to both of you. Thank you so much.